Hello, my name is Bob. Once again, I'd like to welcome you to yet another episode on the White Dog Garage YouTube channel. This episode is part 2 of the Suzuki GSXR crash repair video series. This video is going to be about the replacement of the alternator generator cover on the bike, and whilst we're there we'll be checking out the alternator to see that there was no further damage from the crash. The damage to the alternator generator cover could have been a little more than skin deep. Either the stator or the rotor or both could have been damaged in the crash, and I wanted to get a look at that so that we could order relevant parts if we needed to. Looking through the hole in the cover, the stator and the rotor appear to be undamaged, but at that stage I didn't know that for sure. I had removed the lower fairing for access, and I will cover actual fairing removal in a later video. Holding the cover on are 8 cap head or Allen head screws which needed to be removed. This bike has lost a considerable amount of oil after the crash. Normally, to work on an intact cover you would either tilt the bike to the right or drain the oil before taking it off. With the screws removed, the cover will come off, but not without a fight. It is held fast due to a combination of age and the strong magnetic pull of the rotor on the stator core. Resist the urge to hammer in a chisel or use a screwdriver to force the cover away from the engine. The proper way is to place a pry bar against the 2 tabs on the cover. They are indicated here with arrows, and use these points to lever the cover away from the motor. Even with the gasket seal broken, the magnetic rotor on the end of the crank will still want to cling to the stator inside the cover, making it hard to pull off. With the cover off, I went looking for damage, first on the stator and then on the rotor itself. I didn't find any damage at that stage, so that was good, and it was on to replacing the cover. First I checked that the fit of the new cover was correct. I didn't know whether there were any year-to-year changes in things like the alternator generator cover in these bikes, but it always pays to check before swapping over the stator. There are 2 locating dowels in the motor, and the cover needs to fit them as well as all the screw holes. The owner didn't get a gasket for the cover, but no worries, I made one instead. Having found a suitable piece of gasket paper in my collection, I set to work to make one. Proper gasket paper is made to be tolerant of both oil and heat. Some say you could use the side of a cereal packet for this, but proper gasket paper is cheap, so why would you? First thing I did was to use a pen to trace the outside of the cover onto the gasket paper. Then I used a transfer punch to mark the screw hole positions. Next, I used scissors to cut out the rough shape of the outline. Before going back to cut along the line to give the final outer edge of the gasket. This is one way of making the gasket. Another way is to hold the gasket paper on the cover and gently tap around the cover edge with the face of a ball peen hammer, after which the ball end would then be used to indent the screw and dowel hole positions. Works a treat with steel components and those which can be held solidly. I didn't use this method here because the outer surface of the cover could easily be damaged by holding it in a vise or such, and the thin mating surface would have made it hard to get a good transfer of the shape. Then I used the transfer punch to mark the actual screw holes by placing the centre pin in the position mark and then tracing around the outside of the punch. This hole punch has a hollow centre and was used to punch out the 8 screw holes. Following a quick check of the gasket fit on the cover, I used a pen to roughly mark the internal space. Which I then cut out with the scissors. Placing the gasket back on the cover, I sketched a new internal space closer to the edge. Which I then cut out as well. There are 2 dowels that fix the cover in position on the motor, and there are corresponding blind holes in the cover. To locate these on the gasket, I applied a coating of grease to the mating surface of the cover. Grease will also be used as a gasket compound, so this is not wasted. I then neatly laid the gasket over the cover and massaged the surface to ensure an accurate transfer of grease to the gasket surface. Lifting the gasket carefully away and turning it grease side up revealed the exact positions of the dowel pin holes. I then punched out the 2 dowel holes in the gasket. Finally, I used the scissors to trim the inside of the gasket to roughly match the cover surface. Back at the bike, I cracked the 3 screws holding the stator to the old cover, as well as the screw holding the clip that holds the alternator wires against the case. Before removing first the clip screw and then the stator screws completely. The stator was then removed from the old cover. Then it was on to another check of the stator and the rotor. There are no marks on the stator and no marks or cracks in the rotor. The area around the rotor is remarkably free of shrapnel from the wearing away of the old case, but I intended to drain the oil and replace the filter just in case. Fitting the stator in the new cover was essentially the reverse of removing it from the old one. First, I fitted and tightened down the 3 screws that hold the stator on. I don't have a torque figure to hand, I do it all by feel. But they are 6mm bolts, so 10 Newton meters or just over 7 foot-pounds should be about right. I also put thread locker fluid on all of the screws, including the one holding the cable clip. You don't want any of them coming undone in use, trust me. Finally, I positioned the cable in place and fitted and secured the cable clip. Then I fitted the gasket to the engine, making sure it went cleanly over the locating dowels. Then a quick wipe of the surfaces, after which I applied grease to the outside of the gasket. Then it was on with the cover. The magnetic rotor draws the cover in, but it'll only mate to the engine when it's been slid over the locating dowels. With the cover in place, I fitted each of the screws in turn before doing them up. Again, I don't have a torque figure for them, I do it by feel as I said, but they are 6mm bolts, so about 8 to 10 Newton meters or 6 to 7 foot-pound in this situation should be about right. I then wiped down the cover to remove any oily or greasy marks, and the fitting was done. Before I started the bike to check for leaks, I changed the oil. Pretty straightforward process. I undid the drain plug at the bottom of the sump and allowed the oil to drain into a collection pan. Once the oil was drained, I removed the filter at the front of the crankcase and allowed that area to drain as well. I then coated the rubber seal on the new filter with oil and fitted it to the crankcase and did it up. After which I refitted the drain plug and did it up as well. I then added oil until the sump contents reached the top of the sight glass. Then I started the engine, checked for leaks around the alternator generator cover, and there was none, and that's great. Don't forget to wait a minute or two after the motor shuts down, then top up the oil to the full mark. There's no damage to the alternator and the cover replaced, so I was ready to move on to the bodywork. In the next episode I'll show you what you get when you buy a complete new fairing kit, and I will start work on replacing the main fairing. So the best way to catch the next part is to subscribe to the channel, and while you're there, ding the bell so that you get a notification from YouTube when the next part loads. Thank you, and I look forward to talking to you on the next episode.